Last week, we discussed C.J. Stroud and what he is as a pro prospect and where he might fall in the NFL draft. This week, it's all about Jaxon Smith-Njigba, the talented wide receiver at Ohio State. Will he be a first-round pick? How high will he be picked? We'll go over all that today on Locked On Buckeyes.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes for the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Thursday, April 6th in the year 2023. And today, once again with us, it's my guy, Ryan Roberts. He is a draft scout. You can find him at Ryzen Draft Scouting. He covers recruiting for Notre Dame at Notre Dame as well. And he's a busy man this time of year. Different shows. He's going on vacation soon, adding a youngster into the world, another kid to his family. Busy man, and I love having Ryan on the show, not only because we get along and we're buddies, but he really brings great insight to what to expect this time of year as the NFL draft is literally less than a month away. Ryan, welcome back to Locked On Buckeyes.
I appreciate it, Jay. I appreciate it, man. I appreciate you, as always, for having me back on. I know, like you said, it's a little bit busy. I'm less than 2 months away from a new baby. I'm less than a month away from the draft, but excited to be here as always, man.
Man, it's a busy time. And I'm just thinking about, like, what's going to happen over the next few weeks as a player like Njigba will be going on different visits. A player like Jaxon Smith-Njigba will be possibly making money and raising his draft stock. And right, I don't say that too often about guys this time of year, but him taking him being injured in 2022, and then the combine performance, the pro day performance kind of reminded everybody what he is as a receiver, his routes running, his acceleration, his quickness. And he's a guy, Ryan, that if I need a receiver in the first round, I am thinking, do I go O-line, protection? Do I go quarterback, or do I go receiver? Do I go best player available? So there's a lot of thoughts going into Njigba, because what we saw in 2021 for this young man, Ryan, was special.
Yeah. No, it was. It was one of those situations where, you know, you had the attention obviously was more on the older receivers Correct. In the room. I mean, when I say older, it's, you know, one's a junior, one's a senior, right? But Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson obviously took a lot of attention off of Jaxon Smith-Njigba, and he was able to take full advantage of obviously his one-on-one opportunities, working out of the slot. And I mean, everybody remembers the game against Utah to end the year, right? Where he had over 300 yards in the bowl game in 2021, right? So he is a very talented football player who took advantage of being around some other really good wide receivers. But at the end of the day, man, you don't have over 1,600 yards receiving in a season in college football on the major college level in the Big Ten, working against some of the better defensive backs in college football, if you aren't very talented, right? So we saw that in 2021. I think people forgot about it a little bit because, you know, he was hurt in the first game against Notre Dame. He misses a few games. He tries to come back, doesn't quite have it, and has to kind of shut it down the rest of the season. But people forget that he is a very good football player. But I think the pro day and the combine performances, man, have started to remind people a little bit why we were mocking him in the first round before the season started.
It's weird. It's really weird because I said it earlier, and I'll say it again. I don't normally think guys can make that much money this time of year. Like, you're literally less than a month away from the draft, and most NFL teams, even during the season, they are doing their evaluations. They have guys at the games. They're scouting you. They're doing their homework. They're digging into your history. They're trying to figure out everything about you as a player and a person to see if you're the kind of guy they want to add to their roster. But when a guy like Njigba at the slot position was seemingly kind of a guy that was just a do-it-all kind of guy. Now, granted, I will say one thing I love about him, Ryan, the two games where one of the top guys, Olave or Wilson, were out were his best games of the season. One against Nebraska, 15 catches, I think 240, two touchdowns in that game. Then the Rose Bowl was 15 catches, was a 300 plus through the air. Well, I forget how many touchdowns he had, but it was just like one of those things where it's like, when he was the focus, Ryan, he was killing it. Now, granted, you might have been able to say he was going up against a running back because Utah put a running back at defensive back. Okay, that's context. I love context, so we have to put that in there. But he's still so special, and him as a football player, you don't see it very often. Does that translate? Before we get to the eval, do you think his game translates to the next level?
I do. I think that he's role specific. I don't want to say scheme specific, right? Because I think that there are some attributes that he has that can work in a short, intermediate, and a deep level threat in an offense on the next level. But I do think he's role specific, and obviously we'll get more into that, but I do think he's a slot receiver. I do think that that's where he's going to best fit. I don't see much ability for him to play on the outside on an extended period of time. Everybody, you can't play in the slot 100% of the time, right? There's going to be some times where you're going to have to play, whether you're an X or a Z or whatever it might be, kind of anywhere in between, depending on what the formation is. But I do think that there's a little bit of a role specificity to him, which is fine. That doesn't matter anything. We'll get into a comp that I've had for him for a long time, and some people I think kind of look negatively about at the comp that I have on Jaxon Smith-Njigba, but I think it's actually more of a plus and kind of me being very optimistic with his role at the next level. But yeah, I think there's some role specificness to what he's going to play at the next level, but that doesn't mean that he's not a really good football player in that role, if that makes sense.
If you could take some time and just dive into who he is, what he is as a football player.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, he is, like I said, he is the prototype slot receiver for today's game. The best parts of Jaxon Smith-Njigba, in my opinion, are his mental side of the game, because he is physically a very talented player in the sense that he can change direction well. He has good body control. He can work through contact, which is really nice. More from a route running, working through contact than a winning in the air perspective. But the biggest attributes for me, Jay, is that the kid is just so crafty for his young age, man. He understands spacing. He understands how to settle in soft spots. He understands how to attack leverage. One thing that the Ohio State receivers all did really well in 2021 that was super consistent, and I'm talking about Wilson, Olave, and Jaxon Smith-Njigba, is they understand how to attack blind spots really well. And I don't think I've seen anybody in the last few years that was better at it than Garrett Wilson, but Jaxon Smith-Njigba knows it really well. He understands that if I attack a blind spot for a cornerback, that's going to make them react, and that's going to make me have an easy, open opportunity to get in and out of my brace and then ease into some easy acceleration and be able to create some instant separation. I think that's his biggest attributes for me, is that he understands how to attack defenders properly. He understands how to settle in zones, and he understands more than anything how to out-leverage people for the football. So he's going to create a lot of instant separation from a short intermediate perspective. I do think that parlays to playing in the slot the majority of the time, which is what he did at Ohio State. He played in the majority in the slot in general. And I think that kind of really translates to the next level, because that understanding of how to attack defenders, but also how to attack spots, how to attack soft spots and zones, that thing is advanced, man. He has a really advanced understanding, despite only being probably 21 years old, I think, at this point. He really is a very naturally gifted player from just kind of a football understanding of where to attack on the field.
When it comes to a slot receiver, does he have the body to withstand? Now, I'm going to stop real quick.
Yeah.
What I'm about to say is me kind of growing up, and I know the game has changed, but you don't have slot receivers going over the middle or any receiver. Chad Johnson, Terrell Owens, Randy Moss, doesn't matter. You don't have receivers going over the middle having to get hit by a Ray Lewis or Brian Dawkins or Ed Reed. Those days are long gone. Sure. But you still have to endure some pretty brutal hits. It's just the type of hits they could do back then. Those things are kind of being outlawed in the league right now. But Ryan, do you think Njigba's body can withstand the hits that a slot receiver might take week in, week out in the National Football League?
I do, because I think that there are different types of slot receivers, right? It's not all the same as far as, there's some guys that feast through contact, right? You think of Deebo Samuel, if he's inside the slot. I think about Golden Tate, who was obviously a great receiver for the Lions a few years ago. He was more of a physically put together yak guy that's going to break tackles and almost turn into a running back when he gets the football in his hands, right? So they're feasting through contact. But then there's other receivers like the Keenan Allens of the world, who's actually my comp for Jaxon Smith-Njigba, who are, I would call them slippery, right? Like I would call them, like they're not the most densely built wide receivers of all time, but they just understand of how to not take massive shots, how to find easy opportunities to get in and out of breaks, how to find easy spots in zones, how to just kind of slip through coverage. Like there's kind of a subtleness to how they play. I've seen Jaxon Smith-Njigba more than adequately enough work through contacts on the college level. And I think that he's one of those guys that, yes, he's not going to be this densely built slot receiver that is a Deebo Samuel-esque player after the catch, but he understands how to be a slippery player after the catch, how to avoid contact. And I think that sometimes we don't give enough credit to that, right? Like it's a completely different position, but I remember Warwick Dunn was a really good running back in the day, Jay, and it was just like his size didn't matter to the running back position because he was so slippery, man. Like he understood how to maneuver his body and not take massive shots. And I think that's what Jaxon Smith-Njigba understands how to do, is to really avoid that contact sometimes. But he does have enough physicality. I mean, he's 6 foot and what do we have? 6'5", 196 pounds. So he's not the smallest receiver of all time, right? Like he understands how to withstand contact. Never going to be a guy that's going to win in the air consistently, but as a slot receiver, that's not really something that you're going to be asked to do a ton either, man. Like he's just going to have to withstand contact enough and be able to avoid contact. And I think he can do both of those things.
Ryan, you've been doing this for quite a while, and you've seen guys that are high caliber type athletes and talents get injured in the season prior to them getting drafted. That's what's happened to Njigba. So I'm curious, I believe it was a hamstring injury, played against Notre Dame, came back against Toledo, came back against Iowa, didn't play a complete game all season long. NFL coaches and executives and even the medical teams, they're hearing about testing the medical, the leg, the hamstring, seeing is it fully healed. It looks fully healed now, but hamstrings can be tricky. How should a team go about trying to draft, or whether they should draft Njigba based off the injury he suffered a year ago?
I don't think it's going to be a massive issue for people. I really don't. It's not structural damage, right? I know that there is some look for those types of nagging injuries like hamstrings or just, I mean, generally like quad injuries, like those types of like lower body stuff that maybe isn't structural, but just can be nagging. And I mean, you have seen, I will say this, hamstring issues can plague people for the course of their career. Like it's not something where it's just like one time and it's done all the time. But I think as long as it's not structural, people will be able to be on board with it and be okay with it, right? Because it wasn't even something where it's one hamstring injury, right? Like I don't know the full medical history on Jaxon Smith-Njigba going back to coming out of high school in Texas, right? But if he hasn't had a history of consistent issues with that hamstring, I wouldn't value that, or I wouldn't have too much question marks over that, right? If it was a consistent issue where it's like he missed a game or two as a sophomore, he missed a game as a freshman, he missed some games in high school, then that's a recurring issue, right? But just having the one issue, as long as it's behind him and you're able to just kind of look at it and just say like that was just a unnecessary thing that happened, and then he wasn't able to get back on it quick enough, and he maybe came back a little too soon at points in the season that he probably shouldn't have even tested it out. I think that you just kind of notch that as like that's just a one-time off unfortunate circumstance. But as long as it's not a recurring issue during the course of his athletic career, I tend to not make those things as big an issue as possible.
Ryan, there was a time I was a guy predicting that Njigba would be a second-round pick due to the injury, like simply due to the injury and his limitations on the football field. Like I told you before we started recording, you'll talk to some guys, he can play outside, he can play slot. Doesn't matter, he can play all over the field. Ryan's been pretty consistent before the season, right now going into the draft. Ryan, both times talking about Njigba, it's been slot receiver, but he plays it very well. He's exceptional at that role, which isn't a problem. Not a problem at all. But I was kind of a second-round guy, limited on the field, and I thought that was why it was going to put him into the second round, knowing how good he is at receiver. I've seen a lot of first-round stuff for him lately, more so I've seen as high as number 9 in a mock draft to the Chicago Bears that was post-trade with the Panthers. I have seen 15, I have seen 20, 25 in that range. Where do you see Njigba going in this year's draft?
I think he's going to go top 20 to top 25, somewhere in that ballpark. Like, I think that he has a chance, Jay, for me to be the first receiver off the board. And it's a combination of things, right? One is that there's a lot of good film with Jaxon Smith-Njigba we've talked about, right? There's a lot of good film there. Number two is that I think that he really checked boxes from a testing perspective. You know, like the 4.48 to 4.52 that he ran at the pro day. I think there's some grain of salt with that, right? Because guys are always going to run faster at pro days than at the combine. But regardless, I thought he was going to be a low to mid 4.5 type of guy, right? Like 4.53, 4.55, somewhere in that ballpark. So like that's a checked box. The short shuttle and 3-cone are fantastic, man. Like you look at those numbers. Insane. It was insane. I mean, the 3-cone that he ran, I think was like 6.62 or something like that. It's an ungodly number, man. Like I think the record's like 6.4 something. So like 6.6 something is an absolute just nutty number, right? So he, I think, really just checked a lot of boxes from the testing perspective. And more than anything, he was able to compete, which tells you he's healthy, which is a big thing for him. But the other reason I think he has a chance to be the first receiver off the board and for the demand to go a little higher on Jaxon Smith-Njigba is because it's not a great receiver class. It's not. Like there was, and you date back to the summer, man. I thought Keyshawn Boutte from LSU was had a chance to be a dude. I mean, he's fallen off the face of the earth. I don't even know if I would draft him at this point with just all the stuff that you hear about that, the testing numbers and everything. I'm just not sure I would. Quentin Johnston is a very volatile player. Like you could convince me that he'll be the first receiver off the board. You could tell me that he's the second or third, and I would believe you. Like I think there's a little bit of volatility to him. Zay Flowers, a little bit smaller, obviously out of Boston College. He's a little bit role specific. Joshua Downs is a guy I like, but I think that the NFL is valuing guys like Jaxon Smith-Njigba, Quentin Johnston a little bit more right now. So I look at that and I say there's a lot of uncertainty up top and just in this wide receiver class in general. And one thing that Jaxon Smith-Njigba brings that I think NFL teams are really going to gravitate towards is he has a high floor, man. Like he has the highest floor of maybe anybody in this class. Like Quentin Johnston maybe could be a superstar or he could be Kevin White. Like there's not much in between on a guy like a Quentin Johnston. Jaxon Smith-Njigba is going to be a good football player in the NFL, right? Like it's going to be in the Robert Woods, Keenan Allen type of vibe as far as nothing dynamic really, but just really good players, man. Like that's just what they are, right? So I think that you're looking at a situation where such an uncertain wide receiver group in 2023 that teams, I think, are going to value the floor of Jaxon Smith-Njigba, which is why I think he could be the first receiver off the board. I think he'd go between the first top 20 to 25 picks.
So you're saying that there's a chance, and I say this because it seems like every receiver Brian Hartline puts into the NFL has a chance to be a better receiver than Hartline was in the National Football League. Not trying to be funny at all. That goes to a testament about how good of a coach Hartline was, because Hartline wasn't a bad receiver in the NFL, like not horrible at all. But he was just a solid guy down there in Miami. But it sounds like he's going to put another guy into the NFL, and Hartline, who once that player gets to the league, is going to be better than Hartline was. Njigba could be a multi-time Pro Bowler, all pro. I don't know, but it's possible that if you go to Ohio State, you're not just going to be really good in college. You're going to get paid in the National Football League. So really kudos to Brian Hartline for what he's doing at Ohio State. And I hope he stays for a long time. I heard him on Bustin' with the Boys, and his career aspirations are to eventually be a head coach, and he would love to be that at the NFL level. I know Ohio State, Ryan Day, everybody else there is like, no, stay in Columbus. But I get it, man. Like Hartline's just that dude, and Njigba being what he is as a player and everything you just said, I got to give credit and just give kind of the flowers to Hartline, man. And all right, I don't know what you think about him as a receivers coach. I don't really do this much on the show and show appreciation to a coach, one specific coach. But, dude, it's been special. And I know when you covering recruiting for Notre Dame, it's kind of a back and forth. Like, Notre Dame wants elite guys too, but the elite receivers, it's like Notre Dame wants them. They're going to Columbus. There's a reason why.
Ohio State can get any receiver they want from a recruiting perspective. And why can that happen? It's because of Brian Hartline. It's because of that. It's because of the track record that he's building. I mean, even though get 2024, they already got commitments from Jeremiah Smith and Mylan Graham. It's like, that's pretty dang good, man. Like, it's really, really good. I'll say this about Brian Hartline for me, Jay. It's going to be one of those situations, and I'm thinking back to the 2021 version of the wide receiver room at Ohio State. My favorite thing to do is always look at like the 2001 Miami roster, right? Where you're like, look at that running back room, man. They had Frank Gore and Clinton Portis and Willis McGahee and Jared Payton and all these great running backs. That's what that wide receiver room in 2021 is going to end up being for people in the future, man. Like, we're going to be 10 years from now and we're going to say, man, they had Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Jaxon Smith-Njigba, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Emeka Egbuka all on the same roster at the same time. That's what's going to be, man. I may have just said 5,000-yard receivers in the NFL. Like, I may have just done that on one roster, which is just absolutely nutty. And you have to give all the – look, recruiting aside, because recruiting's been fantastic. I mean, Emeka was a 5-star, right? Like, Garrett Wilson was a 5-star. Chris Olave was a 4. Jaxon Smith-Njigba was a 4. Marvin Harrison Jr. were 4-star recruits. Like, they're all high-end kids from a talent perspective. But what Brian Hartline has been able to teach those guys, because the best part of what Jaxon Smith-Njigba is not athleticism, in my opinion. It's that he knows how to play the position as well as anyone.
Yes.
Garrett Wilson was incredibly talented. He could have settled on all his athletic traits and he would have been a fantastic player. But you know what Garrett Wilson was? The most nuanced route runner in the 2022 NFL Draft, in my opinion. Where does that come from? It's a feel of the game. It's from him, but it's from coaching, right? The ability to understand how to attack blind spots, to run routes, get in and out of breaks, good top ends on routes. Like, that stuff all comes back to coaching. So, yes, hat tip to Coach Hartline. He's done a tremendous job recruiting, developing, and getting the best out of a lot of talent that's in that room.
Ryan, I got a couple things for you here. We did it last week with CJ Stroud. What are some of the best fits for Njigba? You gave us the range where you think he's going to get drafted. Now, what team or teams provide the best fit for him at the next level?
I think the Chicago Bears are a really interesting one if they trade back, because I think that one thing that you have now with DJ Moore is that DJ Moore actually is that guy that can play a little bit inside and out. So I think you can mix and match the ability to use him and Jaxon Smith-Njigba, and then Darnell Mooney can be more of your deep threat, and then you still have Claypool. Like, Chicago Bears, I think, are an interesting one if the trade back happens. I think that for me, like, New Orleans Saints is an interesting one because you have Chris Olave that is more of like that outside stretcher, right? And then you could have a guy like a Jaxon Smith-Njigba that plays inside. The Tennessee Titans are one that pops out to me because they're one of those teams that really off of play action, like they need some guys that can create instant separation on short to intermediate crossers. Like they need those types of dudes. So Titans, Saints, I think the Bears, the great thing about Jaxon Smith-Njigba is like everyone actually needs that type of player, right? Like no matter what offense you run, everyone needs that slot receiver that can create instant separation. That has become a best friend of any quarterback, is the ability to get in and out of breaks and then create instant separation. So take your wide receiver DDT, man. I feel like they could use a guy like Jaxon Smith-Njigba.
Last thing, Ryan, you are the director of recruiting for Irish Breakdown, doing all the stuff for covering Notre Dame for that wonderful, fantastic fan base. I will not talk trash about Notre Dame fans at all. My uncle is actually a Notre Dame fan. He talks trash about Ohio State fans, but I'm going to be a bigger guy here, kind of sarcastically. But no, I do like Notre Dame people. And I'm sure you were kind of following the Mylan Graham recruitment, knowing if Notre Dame could get him, if Notre Dame could not get him. We are literally recording this on the heels of his announcement that he committed to Ohio State. And I'm curious what you think about it. Myself, I will say a little biased, a little excited, an Ohio State fan, but also he's from my hometown of Fort Wayne, Indiana. He goes to the same high school as my cousin. So if I ever get time this season, maybe up there trying to watch a game or two just to see like what kind of kid he is, what kind of player he is. I know he's a number, I think one recruiting database has him as a number 3 receiver in the recruiting class. So you got Jeremiah Smith 1. The third receiver is already committed to Ohio State. And I just love it. Like we talk about Brian Hartline, but these young guys know if you want to be not just be a good receiver, but if you want to be developed into being a great college receiver, be a really good NFL receiver, go to Ohio State. And so I like what he brings to the table, a little versatility, a little different ways to kill you on the football field. But you covering recruiting for Notre Dame, what do you see in Mylan Graham as a receiver? What is Ohio State getting?
I mean, he's dynamic, man. He's absolutely dynamic. He has straight line speed. He has the ability to win vertically. He has the ability to win after the catch. Like, he's a dynamic football player, man. He really is. I mean, his straight line speed and acceleration are the things that pop most when I watch Mylan on film. You know, Notre Dame recruited him for a little bit, but unfortunately it just wasn't a fit that they could make happen. But Ohio State, I mean, they were always going to be tough, right? Like, I think that one could have been an Ohio State Notre Dame battle, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to count out Ohio State to win any wide receiver, right? But I know that Notre Dame really liked Mylan Graham for a while there. Ohio State, I think, is getting one of the more physically gifted wide receivers in the class. Not the biggest kid in the world. I mean, he's about 6 foot, 175 pounds, maybe 6.5 feet, somewhere in that ballpark. But he's one of those kids that anytime he has the football in his hands, he can create a big play. Like, he's that type of dude. So you'll see on film, man, like, they just try to get the ball in his hands quick, and he just has that stupid acceleration ability to hit home runs. Great speed, acceleration. He's just a playmaker, man. Any way you can get the ball in his hands, he can make something happen with it. There's no doubt.
Ryan, love having you on. I love being able to get this in before you go on vacation, and also before we get too close to the draft. We have literally, Ryan and I have 2 more shows to record about this. 3 Buckeye offensive linemen in one show, 3 Buckeye defenders in another show. And I just love having Ryan on the show. And you got a little bit of everything from Ryan today. Some of the draft stuff, some just really college football fan and appreciation for Brian Hartline, and some of the recruiting stuff. Ryan's just a all-around guy. That's why I love having him on the show. That's enough being nice to Ryan. I'm not that nice to Ryan all the time. Let's cut that out really quickly. Ryan, if you could, I got to stop joking around. If you could, Ryan, let everyone know where they can follow you on Twitter and catch up with all your scouting stuff going on right now as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, amidst in draft season, riseanddraft.com, and my handle is the same. It's rise, the letter N, draft on Twitter. Follow me. I'll be having a lot of like cool tidbits, I think, kind of leading up to the draft. I mean, on the site, we have the prospect database, the mock draft simulator. It really is just more for people that just like to kind of learn more about these prospects and learn, strategies that teams might be able to, implement when draft day finally comes around. So check out the sites, Rise and Draft on Twitter. I have some recruiting stuff out there, obviously. I have a lot of NFL draft stuff. Come by, and DMs are open, man. If anybody wants to talk ball, always.
And guys, you can follow me on Twitter at jstevens07. You can send all of your emails to jstevens317@gmail.com. Love having Ryan on the show, and I'm going to poke fun, be nice to Ryan every now and then. I'm normally just taking shots all the time, but I'm in a good mood. I know the weather outside is not frightful. It kind of is frightful. Not the snow kind of frightful, but there's literally a storm brewing outside my window as I speak. So it's kind of frightful. So I wanted to be a little positive today. I do enjoy Ryan coming on the show. I look forward to doing it once again. The next show is planning on being about Paris Johnson Jr., DeJuan Jones, Luke Whippler, what they bring to the table in the National Football League, and best fits for them. I'll be more condensed. Got 3 guys in one show, so we can't go as in depth as we have with Stroud and Njigba. But trust me, it'll be good stuff. We'll get that recorded once Ryan comes back from vacation. Ryan Roberts, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Jay. Thank you as always, man.